everybody. My name is Michael Blackman. I'm the director of the Columbia Concert Band. I also happen to work here at Riverville High School, which makes logistics a lot easier. And welcome to our weekend with James Houlik, which is also our Columbia Band's 30th anniversary year celebration. So we're doing everything we can to really do it up. And thank you for joining us. We had a great master class yesterday. Today we have a clinic that is going to end at 2:30. So that we can prep for our performance at 3 o'clock, and I certainly hope that you'll all stay around for that, especially those of you who are playing on the concert. And at that time, we have John here from Music and Arts, who is has some Selmer instruments outside to show you. Selmer is helping to finance Mr. Houlik's visit this weekend, so we really want to give them an opportunity to show off their stuff. So that would be a great time.
Support the home team.
That would be a great time for you to check that out. So I think Mr. Houlik has some things in mind to talk about, but I know he's really good at just kind of taking your questions and allowing the conversation to go where you all want it to go. So I encourage you to do that and have a really great time. So we'll end at 2:30. Thank you, everybody.
What do you want to talk about?
Back to Ted.
Favorite mouthpieces, favorite reeds, hardware. Hardware. If you want.
You know, I'm so over the hardware.
All right.
However, you know.
This question is so 2 minutes ago.
No, I think that there is equipment out there that really is not our friend. I'm very interested in. My great-grandfather used to say everything in moderation, which is why he had this really low car with the oval glass that he would go 95 miles an hour in. I mean, he got moderate as he grew older, but moderation makes so much sense, I think. I have designed and play on my own mouthpiece, and the reason is that I think we're going in the wrong direction from a design standpoint. And I'm not really confident that players are designing the mouthpieces. You know, the saxophone, it shouldn't come as a shock to you, is one big cone. And the thing that makes it different from the clarinet is that the clarinet is a cylinder. It just runs right out parallel. So mouthpieces that have square chambers really have parallel walls. And what could be more important for an instrument than that the sound source is in agreement with the tube through which that sound is going to go. So the mouth, it's such a simple mouthpiece. It could say Adolph Sax on it, except if it did, it would be shorter and tubbier inside. But other than that, it just opens up this inside the side rails are carved out, so it's in agreement with and here's the reason. If we want to have straight side walls, do not support the creation of a broad overtone series. They favor the upper overtones. Do you know what the overtone series is?
Yeah.
You do? Give me an idea.
It's like when you're playing and it's like higher than it's like the notes above the pitch.
So there are other notes within that pitch.
Yeah.
So you did know, I just was testing you. So it's a little like a combination of colors, isn't it?
Yeah.
If I say yellow and blue, what comes out of it?
Green.
Okay. When you see green, you don't say yellow and blue, you say green, right?
Yeah.
So here's the point, when you hear this note, there are lots of notes hiding in there, and I know where they are, so I'll play them. But they're all going on, and and when we do this, are we back? Oh, we're not back at the chalk thing. When we do this, we can think of it as a bar graph, and scientists do. So this is that low B flat that I played. Then after that, there are these overtones are represented in differing amounts. That indeed is what makes our voices and other things recognizable, but more importantly, in this case, it provides us, the scientists call this a recipe in and they call these the ingredients. I mean, and here we go. But at any rate, we want to have as much representation in the lower partials so that we have warmth. If it's in the higher partials, then of course it gets kind of bright. And so that's why I've chosen this mouthpiece. I've been through, I'm not an equipment guy. I have boxes of mouthpieces at home, but I can't remember the last time I opened the boxes up. I should probably put them on eBay and then watch the dollars fall in. But at any rate, because some of them are really old and wonderful, but I don't change that often. I really know what I'm looking for. And I designed this one with a colleague who's no longer living, and then I redesigned it. And what I'm looking for, you know, power and warmth. And the ability to really make it go away, but also a little power. I have commercial jazzer friends who play on my mouthpiece because it's really funky. But if they play in a show, then the conductor, it's all about the actors. It ain't about us, and they don't want to see the conductor's left hand. And so this has a wide range of tone quality and also dynamic potential. And it's a simple, simple idea. But you can look in mouthpieces and see the baffles in there and all kinds of things. I think I'm just going to keep this same design, but I'll put all kinds of controls out here, which will have nothing to do with anything, and that way it will make other people happy. So the answer, I'm not, and having said I'm not an equipment guy, maybe you can help me with this one. We can, you will see. I talked about this yesterday, but about 70% of all professional musicians suffer an injury during their careers. And with the exception of singers, it's usually hands and forearms for musicians. And you know, the flute, I mean, could anything be less natural than doing this, you know? And the funny thing is, there are guys who have invented alternative ways to make a flute, but musicians are also incredibly traditional and stubborn. But we really have to be thinking about injury avoidance. I'm shocked. Why should I be shocked? I don't think that there is a music school in the country with a coach, therapist, medical point person, and yet, you know, if you tour with a musical, there'll be a chiropractor, there'll be a masseuse. There are all of these people who keep the show on its feet, because don't think that the stuff that goes on stage goes on without injury, or at least some straining. But we should really be going at it from that standpoint. So I went and studied the hand and forearm. Up at 5 o'clock to go to the 6 a.m. hand meeting at Wake Forest Medical School. And I stopped going immediately because I was thinking we were going to be dealing with a healthy hand. They were dealing with the unhealthy hand. They'd be photographs of a guy with 3 joints, an extra thumb joint. So then how do we remove it and maximize sensitivity and so forth? Well, that guy's never going to come study the saxophone with me. He's happy to hold a pencil or zip his fly. So I realized that wasn't what I needed. However, there was a doctor who took me in and was really very helpful. And in the end, I ended up with a cadaver and I called him Bob. It was only the upper half of a man. The lower half had moved back to Cincinnati or something. And, you know, and they didn't give me the best. They didn't give me the best stuff. But I took his hand apart and went up, you know, in the anatomy lab, and it was wonderful because all these young medical students are there working into the night on their cadaver, and they'd come over and watch me fumbling around with this piece of immortal beef jerky. But it was, I learned a lot. And you know, I'll tell you something else. I asked for a head. They have a lot of frozen parts there. I asked for a head with a sagittal cut, so it would open up like this, because I wanted to see a side view of, and I asked for one with teeth. I wanted to see, because there are many that don't have teeth, I wanted to see how the tongue rested in the mouth when closed. And then I put a mouthpiece in, and I wanted to see the juxtaposition of the tongue and the reed. And the interesting thing about the tongue is that when you see it in this condition, it's really, we talk about the tip of the tongue, and it gives it a certain reptilian sound, but you can't see that tip. That tip is a collection of sensitivity, and it's not really a pointed thing. It looks like a hard-boiled egg sitting in there. Well, these kids, of course, came over and watched me, they thought I was a little deranged, putting an alto saxophone mouthpiece in some dead man's head. But you know, these are the kinds of questions that I think we have to ask. I would never dare to compare myself to someone like Da Vinci, but you know, he spent a lot of time trying to get to dead people so that he could understand how they worked. And when you look at his detailed drawings of innards and all of those things, it informed what the outside would look like, and that was part of his real interest in it. But yeah, so here we go. I designed an ergonomic saxophone keyboard as a result of this activity. Because the things that are going on, and you're going to help me by calling Stoner at Selmer and telling him Houlik's got a great idea. And Stoner's the president of Selmer. Here, look, this finger goes, this is for chromatic F sharp, goes down, and this one actually has to go in. So it's not common direction. It's a good enough trick to get them to go down together, let alone asking them to come in from different points on the compass. So I took this key, and I took the arm, and I curved it up, and now you can do this. Here, when we do this, actually, the pinky's going downward and off, when in fact I took this and I brought it, curved it up. I took the roller off. You don't need a roller when it's where it's supposed to be, and I roll to it, and when you're there, it's just waiting to come back down, or to be lifted as the case may be. All of the side keys, these and these, are all adjustable in height, because all of our hands are different. So actually, I am kind of an equipment guy, but I'm more interested in improving it in a big way. I took the B neck, see, those of you who aren't saxophonists, we have to slide up to this key in order to get an auxiliary F. Just as likely you're going to get hung up under it rather than getting to it. So I took this pearl off and I put a trough in so you could slide easily. Then this key I made into a slightly different shape, and it has a roller. And so you're able to roll right up to it. And this bis key, which is, this is a B flat, bis means added in French, and that means we have two keys with one finger. Well, I put a roller on it, so you can just go back and forth like crazy, and it's no big effort. I've had many students, particularly alto students, and little girls, I see them going, and then you look back here and you find out that they've got the octave key on the top side of the thumb rest. And so for she was a tiny woman, a college student, I had my repairman cut this rest in half. And then we brought the octave key all the way down. So wherever you put your thumb, wherever your thumb naturally occurs, whether you have a big hand or a small hand, there's octave key waiting. This isn't rocket science, but no one's done anything about this. And so I've got this patented thing sitting in my closet, and I'm going to start seeing guys like Stoner and others, and I want to license it. There's a repairman in Charlotte. He's not a repairman. He's a businessman. He's got one big business. And his idea is to make this keyboard and then retrofit saxophones that people can't live without. So that, you know, there are a lot of Mark VI people who don't want to give it up. And so we'll retrofit them and take their money. But I'm doing them a favor at any price, because it will be so much more user-friendly and frankly, less apt. And I came close to hurting myself once. Walter Hartley had written I guess it was a rhapsody for tenor saxophone and string quartet. And I was playing with a fairly well-known string quartet, and I didn't want to be the odd man. So I was practicing like crazy. And the next thing you know, I'm getting some pain in the upper part of my hand because it was a lick that, you know, Walter writes at the piano. So saxophone music is often easier on the piano in that case. And so I held back. I stopped working on it. And then we got together for the first rehearsal, and those clowns hadn't even looked at the music, and I had beaten myself bloody. But nonetheless, it's better to be prepared. And so it is easy to hurt yourself. The hand is a marvelous thing. We lift up, open like a puppet, extensors and flexors, we close. And so you've got controls coming on the top, controls on the bottom, and then if you wiggle your hand, you notice that your forearm's going like crazy, because this is really the energy source. There are not a lot of muscles here. If there were a lot of muscles, by now I would look like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of handom. And so it's really here. And then, in fact, it's not about muscles. It's really about carrying the information from the brain down to the fingertips. And so a lot of our practice, if we're doing the smart thing, would be to be very deliberate and to be burning in neural pathways, really developing the neural pathways. And a lot of practice doesn't go there. So I've gone a long way from what mouthpiece do I like. But
You just gravitated downward.
Exactly. So I am interested in equipment. I'm interested in us playing mouthpieces that give us the greatest flexibility in every way. And I'm interested in a keyboard that's more responsive.
That's really fascinating.
Oh, it's been,
Everything that you've said that you've...
it's been so much fun. I've got this wonderful young man, he's the repairman for the Pittsburgh City Schools. And he's just a sucker. I can say, I've got an idea, Steve. And I'll work on it on the weekend, Mr. Houlik. So, but we've really created a nice alternative. And frankly, it irks me. There are a lot of Johnny-come-lately saxophone companies out there these days. Everybody and their brother's developing one. And they'll advertise that it's ergonomic. And then I go looking, and I can't find one thing that's improved. And I would say, for everyone, except trombonists, if we're using our digits, we really have to use the least amount of energy as we can. I see people who are going slapping the life out of it, and it's really not good for our hands. So we use, and this by way of saying, it doesn't hurt to go in every 6 months and let someone drop a light in your saxophone and see if in fact you are without leaks. Because if you have leaks, it's amazing how smart we are and adaptable. We just start pressing harder on the key that's not working. But that screws up a lot of things, the best flow of technical information and so forth. So that's probably enough of that unless someone wants to feed me an extension on that. Sir?
Reeds.
Reeds.
Talk about reed sizes and materials.
I use a 3.5 reed. What are you guys playing?
4 reeds, 3 1/4 Leger.
Okay, you're both playing Leger.
Yes.
Okay. Leger is a Canadian synthetic reed company. They've come closer than anyone else to making it. It won't do me that much good because the altissimo is really tougher to get on a plastic reed. And the piece I'm playing here today, it's not a big deal, but I have to just pull a high C out of the air. And so that's an issue. I play a cane reed. I'm playing Alexander right now, Alexander DC. I don't understand Tom Alexander. The cane is grown in France. I think the reeds are made in France. He's headquartered in Japan. I'm sure it's about a woman. It's got to be. 'Cause he's from Brooklyn. But these reeds work for me. I don't really think hard reeds are the answer for much. So I've got a very moderate reed, a very moderate mouthpiece, and immoderate intentions. But this lets me do kind of what I want to do. And you don't work on your reeds because there's no adjustment. I do some adjusting. I have a reed clipper in my case. Sometimes if I play a reed and it's a little soft, I mean, Tom sends me a case of reeds every fall, but I can take one out if it's running a little soft, but I like quality, then I'll clip it, and I found that seems to work well. I know some guys, Eugene Rousseau, I'm told, goes looking for soft reeds that he likes the sound of, then he clips them until he finds the spot where they work the way he wants them to. I've been through 3 different religions connected to reeds. Oh my gosh, you know, for a while it was, I built sandpaper and glass on the back so it's really flat, and then turn the sandpaper over and then polish them up. And then I used to polish the tops, very fine sandpaper, 700 or 800, and just close them down. Then turn it over and polish them. These days, I'm prone to take them out of the box, and if they play well, they're in the club. And if not, then I put them aside. That's a luxury, among other things, because they're given to me. But I think that we can get too nutty about it. I have a friend who recently retired from the Houston Symphony, who during the summer months would make 10 reeds, and he played them all season. And because they passed several tests, and the tests really are a certain density and a certain even distribution. When you hold a reed up and you see those lines, those are xylem and phloem tubes that carry the water up and down in the plant. The plant is called Arundodonax L. It's a member of the grass family. It looks like bamboo. But you know, it's nature's work. And so you can look at a reed and there'll be all of this fiber over here on one side and the other side's quite clear. And that reed, if not today, in a few days is destined to be unbalanced. And the soft side is going to make it hard for me to do some of the tricks that I do. And when reeds are uneven, it's also one of the ways that you get more likelihood of squeaking. Those chirps that none of us seem to like very much. But you know, you've got to find a reed you like and play it. I know this about Leger. You can go to his plant in Canada and he'll make a reed for you, which he'll really do, I think, is try a bunch of reeds. And when you find something that you like, he can customize it, and then he can leave your name in the computer for that reed, and you can call him back and say, I need a couple more James Houliks. And they'll be quite similar all of the time. So, question? Answer.
Do you folks have a workshop, do you, like the Horns have Northeast Horn Workshop and the Southeast Horn Workshop? And do you go to these workshops?
I do. There's the modestly titled James Houlik Saxophone Retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You know, it's not a big deal. 40 people crawl out of the woodwork from all over the country, sometimes from other countries. And we just make music, but it's a very practical thing. I was president of the World Saxophone Congress. And, you know, there's a bunch of guys, a bunch of professors who want to go somewhere so that they can tell the tenure committee that they went somewhere. It's not really practical, and it's not about the art of music, it's saxophone heads. You know, my first concert in New York, I gave a recital at Carnegie Hall, and I got a suite for the reception, so there'd be a room for me to get the hell away from the saxophonists. Because there's so, you know, it's so much of, well, did you use the bis fingering right at the beginning of, I mean, I don't want to talk about that crap. If you want to say, you want to talk about the big picture, about how the music went, why did you choose to do, I'm interested in the product, a little less in the details. You brought your horn, you want to play or show me something? Well, I didn't want to leave you out. You see me with it on your lap. Someone was going to ask a question.
Well, the reason I asked you that question is in the horn workshops, oftentimes we have somebody there from the medical industry. The one fellow does that sort of thing. And on a horn call, if I know you're going to talk about this, I brought the latest issue, which actually has quite an interesting article about horn playing and glaucoma.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Because
so-
of the pressure issue?
Yeah,
Isn't that fascinating?
yeah, so anyway, I don't know, any folks have a kind of a journal?
Nah. I actually have a person who is, she calls herself a body mapper, but she's Alexander's system and all of these things, and she's wonderful. We talk about breathing, which we should talk about it before we leave here today, but, so I do a lot of that sort of thing. At Duquesne, I put together health sessions. I bring in relaxation experts, because tension is not our friend. It is our absolute enemy. It causes us not to have a flowing technique. It often causes us to get injured. But one of the kids that played yesterday, I watched, and there was a very rigid embouchure. When in fact, if we were more supple, and the balance of air and embouchure and air speed, we deal with two things with air. It's not only a quantity issue that we use for dynamics, but there's also a speed thing. When I'm playing on the soft side, actually the air's going fast as heck because I'm staying open and looking for warmth and then supporting it with this fast air. So, this woman is terrific, but the people I have at Duquesne are also terrific. There's a hand surgeon in California who's a saxophonist, and I met him, and then he said, and I told him what I was working on, he said, oh, come out, we'll have fun. So I was up with the chickens and in surgery every day for a couple of weeks, watching him work on hands. Well, you know, I had a moment that was so breathtaking. He was working, a woman had a growth here, and he went in, and it was a ganglion of some sort, and he took it out, and because he's an artist and a sensitive guy, he said, I'll bet there's somebody living on the next floor. So he opened the next level up, and here was another tiny ganglion, and he took it out because it would have filled that vacant space in a heartbeat. Well, now we were down in the workings of this woman's hand. And she was an intrepid soul. She was watching the whole thing with a handheld mirror. And so he said to her, Mrs. Lee, would it be okay if I showed my colleague your mechanism at work? And he moved the fingers, and it was so beautiful. It was this love. There was no blood in it. He empties the hand, and this just pushes it out, and then there's an air tourniquet. And so when he opened her up, there were just a couple little beads of blood. There was none of that dramatic television, oh, I can sponge, you know, none of that stuff. So the flesh was beautiful, and the mechanism was gorgeous. Oh my gosh, it was so beautiful to see it working. And, you know, we walk around taking everything for granted, but this is one heck of a system here, I'll tell you that, and beautiful to see. So, at any rate, I had him do a television hookup from California to talk to the kids about healthy hands and so forth. I do a lot of this because I think it's unconscionable to sit by and set young people up for injury. There's a lady in Pittsburgh who teaches at Carnegie Mellon who was principal flute with the New York Philharmonic. And she's a great lady. And we went over to her house for dinner, and her husband was a bassoonist with the New York Philharmonic. And he played saxophone on the side, and he retired, and within 5 days he sold his bassoon. And now he only plays the tenor saxophone. But she said, bring your horn. And so we were going to have music making. Well, after dinner, she took out her flute, and where you would be doing this, she had the keys extended, so she was doing this. And so then I knew why she was no longer with the New York Philharmonic. She had screwed up her hand. And she's kind of an uptight broad. I mean, I'll give her that, you know. That's the first part of the recipe for injury. And now my colleague, who's principal second in the Pittsburgh Symphony, I see him walking around, and he's got a cast on, and then he's got a brace on, and then I saw him, he took his flute out, and here was his new keyboard. You know, here's a perfect example. What about open hole versus closed hole?
Yeah, I actually play on, I went back to closed because of hand problems.
Okay, but you see, I talked to Jeannie Baxter,
Yeah, they
seriously.
don't matter.
I said to Jeannie, well, those are closed holes now. And she said, you know, I'm a pretty damn good player. And you know, it doesn't turn out, that venting doesn't really make that much difference. But we're hung up on these details, which are, once again, the prescription for injury. I'm talking about it, it might not even be relevant to you directly on your instrument, but there's probably something that could be improved relative to all of these things. And if nothing else, an awareness does a great deal to help us in that respect, I think. Sir?
I was out of the room and I apologize if this question was asked, but when I came in, I heard you playing very softly and you were talking about fast air.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can.
Especially for playing very softly.
And it's fun to talk about. One of the guys who comes to my retreat, and he comes every year, I think it's about a woman. I know it's about a woman, but I won't tell. At any rate, I'm talking about quantity and quality, and he kept saying, I don't know if I can wrap my arms around that. And he's head of some computer stuff at North Carolina University Hospital. So he's got that kind of a head. And he did this remarkable research with Pepsi bottles, with water in them, and all this stuff. And he concluded, after trying to challenge me, that I was right, that there is such a thing. But here's, I can draw it because it probably makes it a little easier. I think of air like a archery target. So here is the bullseye, the core. And it's the speed. But we can add pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano. We can add layers, which is quantity of air. But the speed is always rather constant and hugely important. And here's an example. Yesterday I was working with someone about low notes. And, oh, come on, get out. And I'm wide open here, and I'm relaxed here. If I don't supply that with vital air, it's not going to speak, because I've opened everything up. And so I think that the rings, which is added quantity, are dynamics. But the center, this core, is very fast air. And does it appeal to you at all?
I've heard of it. I'm not sure I know how to make fast air versus just regular air.
Well, you know, here we go. Talk about wives' tales. Welcome to the world of music, urban lore and all that crap. You know, people say, well, it's got to be warm. Air's got to be warm. I suppose there's some truth in that. But I don't know how I could take the stuff in, allow it to occupy my body, and have it come out cold. That would mean, I think you can only get that out of a cadaver. But at any rate, there's, I'm convinced it's so. And so I'll play high because that's where it really becomes quite obvious. But nothing changes except that I'm increasing the quantity. But from the very beginning, if I didn't do that, we wouldn't have that healthy center. Can I make myself a not doer? Spent a lot of time learning to do it. As compared to, it organizes it differently to my ear. Yes.
Expanding on his question a little bit, what do you say for a casual player, or really someone on the more casual side?
What's casual?
Not really doing all the time playing, just doing several bands at school, not professional. I guess.
No, yeah, but let's get rid of those categories and we'll talk about seriousness of purpose, but go ahead.
Do you think it would be necessary much to rotate plastic reeds if that's mostly what I use?
I rotate them, because I've been using plastic reeds for 4 years now, that they crack too. They're thin, even though they're plastic, they still do crack, so I rotate them just for, because if you overuse one.
So they'll all crack eventually.
I have 6 reeds on my back right now, they're all cracked.
I guess the question would be, does long-term use advance the likelihood of cracking? That's what you think?
Yeah.
You have to apply it to the scientific research. You have to have 5 here and rotate them, and have 1 here, but then you have to do the math that has the playing hours connected to each one of the rotating reeds.
I got science. In middle school, I spent $600 on reeds. I spent 40 this year.
600.
I get that part, but you see, I'm an artist, and I'm not interested in comedy. If it was about money, I'd sure as hell be something.
I'm a high school graduate.
Yeah, I know.
When you were talking about your mouthpiece at the beginning, you played in sort of a soft, like, I'm not talking about volume, but like a soft classical style, and then like a harder jazz style, and to me it sounded as much different as my classical mouthpiece versus my metal jazz mouthpiece. What are you doing with your embouchure and your whatever to make that sound so different?
At no time do his fingers leave his head. You know, we're back to this question of voicing. So let's do voicing for a minute. I have a really, gosh, I can't say tiniest here. I have a really rigid former student, and it's all packed this way, and he has no tolerance for anything else. And yet he sent me a CD of some jazzer, closer to a rocker almost, and he said, now this is voicing. Because the guy could practically speak understandable language in the way that he was changing the sounds and so forth. And so it is about voicing. Here's the deal. Donald Sinta and someone else wrote a book about voicing. And I took a brief look at it, and I decided it was incoherent, and I dropped it. But then I had my first Chinese student, and he couldn't get a warm sound. But there's so much speaking in the upper part. Ni hao. It's all up here. When you hear Chinese opera, it's and you know, I love it. I mean, I don't understand it, but I find it pretty entertaining. And when my wife drops a pot lid at home, she'll go, because they use a lot of cymbals and percussion and stuff in the opera orchestra. But I couldn't get past it. I couldn't get the kid to have a warm sound, and he wanted it. And so I brought in a singer, a good gal who had studied the mechanism of the voice for her master's degree. And so she had him doing exercises like, and he was experiencing parts of his body connected to speech that he had never experienced speaking Mandarin. And so, indeed, I then became a believer. And I went from that idea to focusing in the face and so forth. For instance, in several places in the ward, I have to play the high G, just above high F. And we're back to the overtone series now. That high G is very slightly represented in the C overtone series. So it's elusive. And if you've ever been called upon to play a high G, I don't know how many of you have tried, but it ain't there. And so I discovered by using the sound AWE, A-W-E, I make that, I think that word, and I can get the G quite some ease. Let's see if I can get it ahead. Yeah.
Soft palate.
There's not much there, but with that particular voicing, I optimize the possibility that that note will speak. And so when I do the other funky thing, I do use a different internal shape. By and large, I'm always open from here down, just as open as I can be.
Right.
The FM announcer thing.
What was the fingering you just used for that? Was it the F sharp and what?
No, I don't use it. My F sharp is corked closed.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if I was only going to F sharp, that would be fine, but, you know, we'll start on the, I use front F. So it was, so it's the auxiliary F and side B flat.
Got it.
But it's not about fingerings, because if I go high C, I can't, I make the C, the finger doesn't make the C. I had the most wonderful kid come to a retreat years ago. He was a really serious, recently arrived Korean saxophonist. And so he would say, "Do you have a fingering chart?" And I said, "It's not about the fingers." So why? I was trying to do the overtone series and all that. And he asked me 6 times in one session for the fingering chart. And even though I demonstrate that I can use almost anything, and I do use all kinds of crazy fingerings. They're situational. I don't, some of you may have heard a recording that I did with the London Symphony where the end of it, I just go sailing up. And it's called the upward stream, so it would be a logical ending. And I've got a set of fingerings that are so crazy. But, you know, I'm going like a bat out of heaven, and so I just invented some fingerings. I found a new fingering the other day for G sharp. The old fingering didn't work worth snot. Now I got to try to figure out how to relearn it into the places where I need it. But, so, I don't practice the overtone series anymore. But if you're a saxophonist, you really should practice the overtone series. If I may do a momentary commercial, the complete saxophonist by James Houlik and Eric Lover. You can buy it from Alfred or anybody, or you can buy it on my website, jameshoulik.net. But I've got it laid out so that anyone can do it. And the reason for doing it is, we're back to the air again, because you must provide the air and the voicing to be able to go. I know where those puppies are, and if it looks easy, don't be fooled. But it's really possible, and I've got a system set up, so it is really our warm-up, because we're voicing like crazy. But you're right, I do change everything. If I'm going... I reset it, recalibrate.
Do you have like a unified theory of voicing that explains where
No.
what sounds
I've
come
been
from?
playing in saloons since I was 15 years old. And so you just, no, I don't really. But you know, isn't this a wonderful thing? I don't recommend it, but I have such an intimacy with this instrument that I can just ask it to do something, and it responds. And but it has all to do with the fundamental stuff that I did learn. I studied with Sigurd Rascher. He wasn't really a very good teacher, but he had really thought through the higher register and its impact on everything else as the ultimate warm-up. And so I think all saxophonists should have a go with that. And we're very lucky because we have such a wonderful overtone series with which to work. Other instruments don't have quite the same options, although there are things they could invent that would be useful. Particularly good for reed players gaining this control. Sorry, I can't tell you that. If I want to play body and soul, I have it over here. No. Is there another question? Yes, sir.
So I play both jazz and normal sort of jazz?
Yeah.
When you play jazz and like symphonic band, how do you change your style and the way you play? Because I feel like there's so.
When you say
different-
style, what are we talking about?
Excuse me?
When you say style, what are you talking about?
The way you play a note, I guess, I would say.
So far, you're not helping me.
The jazz band versus
Is this
jazz.
an interpretive question or a technical question?
Interpret.
Well, I know that I've worn out at least 2 Stan Getz LPs, 3 John Coltrane, so the needle came out the other side. I've listened to Cannonball Adderley. It's interesting. We're learning so much about the power of music as it relates to our health. And has anyone seen the clip from that's on TV called Alive Inside? Oliver Sacks. Please tell me that you'll go home and Google it. Alive Inside. Oliver Sacks is a neurologist. There's an African-American man sitting in a wheelchair. Nothing. Clearly at a home. I would guess he was somewhere in Queens. Just sitting there. His daughter came in and said, Dad, they put these earphones in, and he starts going, first of all, his eyes open up, double wide, and he's going, and so they gave him it's a treatment. In my mind, they gave him a treatment. They took them out, and they said, do you enjoy music? I love music. Music is passion, music is love. And he just expounded. He was unable to speak before that. And then he said, Camp Galloway, that was my man. And I'm thinking to myself, this man was a vegetable, and he goes from eggplant to philosophically speaking about music and its impact. This is the biggest news relative that I know of about music. It works for Alzheimer's. My daughter is an autism expert. They use it with autistic kids because the music goes in on a set of circuits that can carry language. And language doesn't go in that same way. And I'm telling you this because I'm putting together a CD. It's my personal playlist. And when I'm sitting in the home and the drool's running down on my apron, I want them to put the plugs in, and Cannonball Adderley will be there. And I will recognize it like crazy. So, and anyway, you gotta listen. And listen, because it's all music, and it's playing well technically. It's a huge thing. But then you have to learn a dialect. So, I went out with my uncle, had a band when I was a kid, and go out and stand there and go. If I had it in front of me and I didn't know the tune, and I hadn't heard someone else play it, I would go. But that ain't the tune. So I learned the dialect, and I can't learn it any other way except, how do we learn to speak? We sit at our mother's knee. Happy Mother's Day. So it seems to me that you have to listen, and that's where you differentiate. And there's nothing wrong with either of them. You know, I think it's the greatest thing to be bilingual. And I've made so damn much money playing tunes at weddings and saloons, much of it untaxed. Are there any IRS people here?
Do you think that we're losing some of that language with, you know, the compression algorithms for MP3s? You know, the argument whether you've got a CD which has a sampling versus a vinyl record which has a different envelope versus an MP3 which is compressed and only has what you can hear?
You know, I don't think it changes the utterance. I don't think it changes the placement. so much of this has, when I say dialect, I lived in the South a long time, 30 years. And so I can become one in a heartbeat. And you know, and I love it. I used to go to a black church in Winston-Salem. Wonderful! Oh my gosh! And that's a whole different pace, and I can do that thing. I can go there and be that preacher, at least in my mind. But I'm placing, rather than dealing with these finer issues, which is reduced amounts of signal that we're receiving. So maybe color is going to be an issue in terms of timbre. However, the real issue is, what are today's kids going to put on their personal playlist to bring them back when what I hear on the radio frightens me to death, because there is no melody. There is often very little in the terms of lyric that you can say in your mother's presence, and it's not poetry. There's no rhyme scheme. So I wonder about that. I truly wonder about it, because I can't imagine that some of these people will have that same appeal. This whole thing began with a guy named Peter Giannata at University of California, Davis, where they also have the wine school. But at any rate, it was of great interest to me. But he began playing tunes for people, and he was measuring their response. And now you see, now that we can actually see things changing in real time. So he was measuring the impact of music and it was music from their youth. It's all up here in the front of the portrait, but when we hear music from, say, the ages 13 to 20, 21, oh my goodness, that's our music. It's here forever. And there are all kinds of memories connected to it, which is the beauty of it. Hearing that music, it all comes back. My first wife died when we were both 42. I had a hell of a single period thereafter. She told me to start it and race it, and I took her at her word. So I was seeing wonderful young women and hanging around in the worst places. To this day, when I hear that particular music, I'm there, I'm back, I'm chasing skirts. And so, it's really interesting to me. And so, this guy Giannata did it with healthy people, and then he took it to people with Alzheimer's, and that's when he discovered that we can pull them right back, that we regain the affect and the memories. This guy that I'm talking about in Alive Inside, he looked at his daughter and called her by name because he was back with us. And the interesting thing is, a good dose of music will keep this connectedness going for as long as 24 hours. I can't understand why we wouldn't do it. And I'm really off on my toot, but I'll go a step further. I read funny journals and stuff. I was reading about a couple of guys in New York who work with people in the vegetative state. And one of the concerns about people in the vegetative state is when we decide that they're not going to make it and we harvest their organs. And that's often what it's about. So they put this guy, who didn't have much going for him, in the machine. But in the machine were speakers, and he was running at a very low level. And they piped his mother's voice in, and his brain lit up. It first lit up in the front, and then it later lit up in the visual cortex, and they had to conclude, since he couldn't tell them, that he was probably seeing his mother. Now, my thought was, why don't we could use Pandora or anything, find the music that would have been relevant to that very fertile period in his life, and play it to him 8 hours a day. Let's create a work environment for him, because what we're discovering is that many of these people are mending at a very slow rate. And if the presence of music would provide a fertile environment, the mending might speed up. I would do anything to have the money to do some of these simple researches. I have in my mind that I'd like to start what I would call, if I call it an institute, then people think I'm a phony because I'm making believe I'm a doctor or something. But the initiative for music and the human condition, because it is so important. We use it with the dying. And Is that really important? Well, I don't know. When I'm going, I would be delighted to have an environment that is supportive. I wouldn't mind closing my eyes to the music of Cannonball Adderall or Debussy. So I think that this is really an interesting wrinkle in our time. And so start by seeing that. Then you can get a book called Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks, in which he talks about all kinds of interesting stuff, music and the brain, human condition. But enough of it. Can't we talk about the saxophone? What makes this man tick? Breathing. Well, we are. And that's the problem. Students come in, and it's hard to have the courage to say, now let me teach you how to breathe. Because most of us could say, what the hell do you think I'm doing? But when someone comes to the track coach doesn't say, well, you seem to be able to get around okay. We reteach this whole thing, a different way of using it. So what we are doing, in my mind, is musical breathing, athletic breathing, above all, highly efficient breathing. I'll put this down because we're going to have some fun here. Can someone tell me about breathing? Just tell me about how musicians breathe that makes it a little different than other people.
Trying to fill up as much, you're trying to get as much air in and out.
How are you doing that? Someone said the word. Diaphragm.
Right.
All right, where is the diaphragm? Okay, it's higher than we think. Okay, people always point like this. What is the diaphragm?
Muscle.
The big membrane.
Yeah, probably. Do we have any awareness of our diaphragm? Do you have an awareness of your diaphragm?
Not, well.
How is your pancreas feeling?
It's consciously try to, but it is an unconscious.
It's a physical manipulation as compared to us saying, okay, diaphragm, do your thing.
Right.
We don't have that kind of awareness of it. Okay. And in reality, it actually is a very efficient barrier between a hollow place and breath. And it's a terrible thing to say, but if you see a dog hit by a car and they seem to be panting to death, they are very subject to ruptured diaphragms, and their guts are gradually crawling in and taking over what should be a hollow spot. Okay, now at least we know where it is, we roughly know how it behaves. Please stand. Join me in breathing prayer. First of all, we have to teach people to breathe these days without touching. You know, when I was a kid, we could just, come on, sweetie, let's get this done. Well, we don't, no hands. This is a knifeless surgery. So, someone hooked me up with the whole yogic tradition. Yogi breathing is a great thing. And so what we're going to do, if you are in a position where you might teach someone to breathe, the first thing to do is to empty the tank, which creates a certain anticipation that more will be on the way. So we are going to empty, and then we are going to take air in for 8 counts. Just hold it in there, and it'll be wonderfully silent here. And then we will send it back out through pursed lips, as in, and the reason for this is that otherwise it just kind of falls out. But more importantly, it's very much akin to what we're doing when we play. And beyond that, it allows us to meter it, and that's what the yogis get right. You know, we get kids to take a belly breath, and then blow it out. Well, that's good, but if you meter it, then you begin to know how you're really doing. So we're going to empty. And we used it up in 8 counts. Now, the whole reason for this is that we now go from panic breathing, breathing on demand, to breath management, air management. This is really a helpful thing. And so, Would you ask me if I'm happy to be here?
Are you happy to be here?
Yup. We don't manage it very well. We don't budget it. We take more than we need sometimes, and we end up with stale air. And sometimes we don't breathe as deeply as we should, and then we get to that last note, with which many of you might be familiar. Squeezing the last bit out. So, let's do this. I usually spend much more time on this, but we don't have time. And by the way, there are lots of folks who are sedentary by employment, and they get up and they do deep breathing, because frankly, you know, you're not getting any blood to your brain when you're just sitting there breathing shallowly. And it's a wake up. It's a good feeling. So, and I have the good fortune of having a sweet little park just across the street from my home. And so I go there to walk, and I'm doing yogi breathing, and I know the neighbors are saying things about me. It just delights me. But I'm healthier than you are, and you don't even know it. But so here we go. We're going to empty, and then we're going to take it in at 8, and let's see if we can get it to last for 12 counts. This means we're going to be judicious, and this is where fast air comes in, because if we're trying to make it last, we can be fast and use less. So empty. So we indeed have some left. Okay, this will be the last one. I do this at my retreat, just to let the young people make me look like a fool. This is a confession. I flew on Air India, and I used London as the central stop, got to London, and then got on another plane and went to Johannesburg and played a concerto. And then I came back and changed planes and went to Istanbul and played a concerto. And as I was practicing with the orchestra in Istanbul, I began to, I was getting itchy. And by the time I got back to the States, I had double pneumonia. And so I gave my doctor 10 days to cure me before I went to Slovak Republic for a week of touring with the Slovak Philharmonic. And he then was kind enough to remind me that pneumonia is still the #3 killer, and it was the only gig that I bagged on. I played the night my wife died. I'm saying, not hell what I could have done anyway. But I keep my promise, and I'm so scared. But I also now have scarred lungs, and I really think about where I breathe and how I breathe. The war. I've got a comma there, the size of my thumb, which basically says, fuel up, Houlik. And if I don't, then I end up at the end having to put a breath in. But I am challenged for life. So this is very important to me. Here it is. We're making believe that we all have a paper airplane. We're sending it out. This is visualization time, boys and girls. And we're going to take this the deepest breath we can, and we're going to send it off. And when we send it off, it is flying until we don't have any air to push it, all right? So we'll see who's standing last. Here we go. First of all, we're going to empty, and we're going to take it as deeply as we can on 8 counts, and then I will set it up, and we'll go. Here we go. Empty. That would have gotten me through the leg of the ward. Please sit down. I really recommend this kind of disciplined approach. You know, this is, I'm using the word discipline. This is the missing element. In June, I'll go to the mountain, and here will be all these people ready to learn to play the saxophone. Okay, let's take a minute and warm up. What are we warming? Maybe the air inside the horn. The whole idea is that we do so many things somewhat mindlessly. We really want to have an intentional approach to what we're doing. So this means if we find a hard lick in a piece, we should slow down. First of all, get right down. I love it. I'll say to a student, they're playing an etude, and I'll say, where is the problem? And they'll go, well, can you be a little more specific? So then they might go, I say, are there not two notes that don't seem to want to go one to the next? And could we identify that so we could fix it? And so this is a far more diagnostic way of doing things. And where I'm headed right now is technical development. Because I fooled around with the hands and forearm, we know that these two digits, ring and pinky, they are not very independent. And it's because they're sharing a muscle source. And therefore, what we have to, we're never going to get them to become independent. But what we do is we practice them with intention so that we are blazing neural pathways. And it doesn't make any difference what your instrument is. You're blazing neural pathways, which gets, so I do exercises like a digit at a time. So I'll go, and then I'll go. It's the same interval, but I'm going the other way because we have the extensors. Together, the simultaneity. I've done it a jillion times in my life, but I'll run the metronome so I don't get carried away. I'll say to a student, let me hear you play that interval, and they'll go. Well, now we haven't proven anything because we're not really putting it in a rhythmic context so that we're intentional about it. You know, I could open a monastery. I really could. We'd have such disciplined saxophonists, and then we would have vineyards. But never mind. So I'm very careful about it. And I practice in very small increments. I used to campaign against scales. I wanted to have buttons. I said scales are stupid. Because, well, here's what saxophonists do. They play up the scale and down the scale. They pass a treble spot. It's only close, but since it only happens twice, they don't worry about it. But so I have exercises that go just a few notes at a time, as I was just doing. Just smaller increments so that we really find out where the problems are, which are hiding there in the scale anyway. So I think that we really have to bring ourselves to be a little more disciplined if we're going to have a dependable way of learning. I take first this technical approach, but then I apply it to difficult licks in the music. This tiny part that we repeat, and I repeat it, and then if I can shrink it. If I say, well, it's because this D, the two fingers on either side of F sharp don't want to go up together, then I go to work on that. So I think we really need to be as specific as we can be, as disciplined as we dare in the way we teach ourselves. You see, that's the bottom line. I think too much teaching goes on that is not about teaching us to teach ourselves. And you know, singers, it's a little different. Singers come back to their teacher throughout their lives, and it's because they are changing, their equipment changes, so they have to come back for a recalibration and a tune-up. But I shouldn't have to go back to my teacher. I should have learned enough about how I learn and what the challenges are, that all I need is occasionally to have a friend listen telling whatever it is they hear. I saw a lady at one of my single periods, and she would always say, "Sweetie, you better start practicing again, the vibrato's getting slow." So, you know, a friend's a good thing to have if you're trying to keep track of what's going wrong. But at any rate, we could really start to close down. I know you folks have to go warm up. But are there any other topics that we want to touch upon? Yes?
Just one quick, considering how extremely custom-made your saxophone is,
It's not.
did you have anything done with the high A? To make it manageable intonation-wise? Or do you just kind of live down a little like all the rest of us?
You have choices. I have a chromatic scale for the full range of the instrument, and I measure how high or low each of these things are, and then I go to my repair person, and I have a good one, and I'll say, go to work on it. He'll lower some pads, he'll raise some. I've got my E is a little high. I've got a liner. He lined my D. So high keys. You can.
Lovely.
Well, yeah, but it's possible. So, but you got to bring them the raw material. You need to challenge them to make this right. So, friends, thank you very much for putting up with me. It's a great privilege to be here. And now I'll take a little time and put on my makeup and my special foundation so that I can get the high notes. That's not true. You know, I was playing a wonderful piece of wonderful music in its world premiere. And the local critic interviewed me and he said, "Well, is this piece difficult?" I said, "I'm going to wear an athletic supporter on the outside of my tuxedo to make it perfectly clear that I'm knocking myself out up there." And he put it in the paper, of course. But beware of what you say to journalists. Thank you very much.
Outside, that would be wonderful. For CCB members, the plan I've got put together is we're going to